Part 2, Capture. Chapter 1. As each day passed, the children's ability to look, listen, feel, taste, and smell improved immeasurably. The professor taught them the wonders of music, not only instrumental music, but the music of running water and the sighing of the wind, the hum of a city and the song of the birds. Lindy was by far the best pupil. Her imagination was so vivid and her senses so aware that she easily pulled ahead. The professor knew that she was already capable of making the journey to Wangdoodleland. The decision to go had to be delayed because the boys were not ready. Tom was doing well, but Ben was having difficulties. For the first time in his life, he discovered that being the eldest did not make him the most competent. Being 13 years of age, he had more to question, more to doubt. He had to fight logic and his own stubborn opinion of things. Mrs. Potter asked Lindy one day, "What on earth do you find to do over there all the time?" "Oh, we play and have tea and the professor teaches us." Lindy's voice was deceptively casual. "What does he teach?" "He talks about life and stuff like that. We look through the microscope and we go for walks and rides. It's great fun." Mrs. Potter changed the subject. "You know, Daddy and I are going to see Grandma on Saturday. We'd love to take you with us, especially since it's your midterm holiday next week. But Grandma just isn't well enough. We'll be back a week from Sunday. In the meantime, I've arranged for Ethel to stay with you." "What if the professor asks us out?" Lindy wanted to know. "That's all right. I'll tell Ethel that you'll probably be spending a great deal of time with him. Then she won't worry about you." When the children visited the professor the next day, Lindy told him about her parents' plans. He looked thoughtful. Then he made a startling announcement. "I think the time has come to start a new phase of your lessons. I think you are ready to try sympathetic hats." "Sympathetic hats," said Tom. "Actually, I call them scrappy caps," said the professor with a smile. "A scrappy cap is a covering worn on the head, which is sympathetic to the brain's impulses and desires." "Do they have some special power or something?" asked Ben. "I would say that there is something very magical about scrappy caps," replied the professor. "Let me show them to you." He left the children and a moment later returned carrying 3 brightly colored objects. "These hats are your passports to success. In spite of all our hard work, I doubt that you'd come close to seeing the Wangdoodle unless you were wearing one of these. Once we begin the great adventure, you may not, indeed, you must not, ever remove them from your heads. Not only will they help us to get to Wangdoodleland, but more importantly, without them, we will not be able to find our way home." The professor held up an exquisite bonnet made of white lace and linen and brilliant red chintz. "Lindy, this is your hat. It comes from the Netherlands. The underlining is made of the finest linen. See how the red topping is covered with meadow flowers and hens and roosters and rabbits." "It's lovely," said Lindy. "Hold it carefully, but don't put it on your head," cautioned the professor. "Tom, this is yours." He held out a bright blue felt cap that resembled a funnel with a cloth pipe pointing backwards. "It comes from Madeira. The purpose of this little pipe was to hold a sprig of rosemary, which gave the wearer the benefit of its magical powers. Did you know that in ancient Greece, students wore rosemary twined in their hair while studying for their examinations? It is supposed to strengthen memory, and it is thought to bring success to any undertaking." Tom took the hat and held it carefully. The professor handed Ben an Indian headband with a small tassel hanging from it. "Ben, yours comes from Guatemala. It is made by the Mayas. They were highly skilled people who were able to record history by means of picture writing. You can see some on this band. Notice how it is actually one long piece, which has been wound around 13 times, and that the coils have been sewn together to keep the shape. 13 was considered a magic number." The professor looked at the children and smiled. "You will discover that your sympathetic hats make all the difference. Once they are upon your heads, you will experience a great feeling of exhilaration. Tomorrow we will begin to practice wearing them." Lindy walked eagerly home from school the next day, happily contemplating the midterm holiday and the time she and her brothers would spend with the professor. She was desperately eager to begin the new lessons with the scrappy caps. She had the feeling that something wonderful was going to happen, and so she began to sing. "I got a pretty hat to wear upon my head, and it's filled with magic, or so the professor said." She skipped around a lamppost and ran full tilt into someone who was leaning against it. Her books went flying in all directions. "Oh, I'm so sorry." Lindy was very startled. "Hello, little girl," said a distinctly unusual voice. Lindy looked up. The stranger smiled and lifted his hat in greeting. "You dropped your books. Allow me." Lindy watched as the man bent from the waist and scooped up her books with his extraordinarily long arms. "Clumsy of me. I wasn't looking where I was going." The sound of his voice reminded her of wind whistling through a long tunnel. "May I walk with you a little way and carry your books?" he asked. Lindy remembered her parents' warning never to speak with strangers. "Well, You're Melinda Potter, aren't you?" She was completely taken by surprise. "Yes, I am." "The professor is a good friend of mine." "You mean Professor Savant?" Lindy experienced a wave of relief. "The very same. We have spent so many pleasant evenings together. He talks of you so much." The stranger pulled a golden yo-yo from his pocket and executed a quick trick with it. Lindy fell into step beside him as he began to walk. "How are things coming along with your trip to Wangdoodle Land?" he asked casually. Her jaw dropped. "You know about that?" "Good heavens, yes! I've known about it for some time. The professor and I often chat about it." Oh. She was surprised that someone else knew about their plans. The golden yo-yo flashed in the sunlight and made a soft humming sound. She glanced up at the odd-looking stranger. "I expect you'll be making a big move before long," he said. "To Wangdoodle Land?" "Yes." Well, as a matter of fact, we will. We're trying the Scrappy Caps this afternoon." "Scrappy Caps?" He looked startled. "Or, I should say sympathetic hats," Lindy said and smiled. "They're very pretty." She was fascinated by the whirling, bobbing yo-yo. "They're going to make all the difference. It'll be the most wonderful adventure in the whole world. We'll meet the Whifflebird and see the Flutterbies and lots of other creatures." "You really think you'll get there?" "Of course we will. The professor says we're nearly ready. It'll be any day now." "I'm beginning to believe it." The stranger spoke in a grim voice, but Lindy was too enthusiastic to notice. She pulled him to a halt at the gate of her house. "This is where I live. I'm afraid I have to go now." "Well, we'll be seeing each other again, I'm sure." He bowed and shook her hand. Lindy had the impression that she was holding a piece of wet seaweed. "Take care, little girl. I would hate to see something happen to you." "I will. Goodbye." Lindy took her books and walked to the front door of her house. She turned around to wave politely, but to her surprise, her escort had vanished. The street was completely empty.